Hi, everybody. My name is Sanjay Bhojraj. I am a cardiologist and functional medicine practitioner, and I'm here in collaboration with Rupa Health to talk to you today about the 5 lab tests that you need to ask your doctor for the next time you go in for your checkup. Now, a lot of times patients will ask me, Doc, why do I have to ask for certain blood tests? And I think there's a couple of issues going on. Number one, a lot of times doctors are just busy and don't think to order a lot of these tests because we're so accustomed to ordering the routine lab work, complete metabolic panel, blood counts, hemoglobin A1C, maybe a thyroid level, depending on what you need. But I think a lot of times when you are looking at your individual health, it's really important to feel empowered and feel comfortable with your doctor to be able to ask him or her to be able to check certain lab tests that really can help guide you on your path to better health. So today, as a cardiologist, what we're going to focus on is 5 lab tests that aren't part of the standard panels that I think are very important for you to ask your doctor for next time you go in. And we're going to start with something called Apolipoprotein B. Now, most of us, probably anybody over the age of 45, has already had a cholesterol panel checked. And the history of a cholesterol panel is really one that dates back into the 1980s, before we knew all the different nuances of levels of things like bad cholesterol and good cholesterol. We really had to check for something called total cholesterol and something called triglycerides, as well as something called HDL, which a lot of you probably know as the good cholesterol. Since the 1980s, though, we have had a ton of advancements in what we've been able to learn, particularly when it comes to lipid particles. And one of the newest and I think most powerful tests that we can do is this Apolipoprotein B, also called ApoB. Basically what that is, it's a marker on the cholesterol particles that shows that this is the type of cholesterol particle that's going to cause problems. It's a marker of what we call atherogenic cholesterol particles, meaning these are the ones that cause plaque, can block arteries, can break off and cause strokes and heart attacks and things like that. So it is a test that is relatively inexpensive, and the cool thing about this is that it's an actual measurement that can be made. A lot of the other cholesterol tests are actually calculated, particularly that bad cholesterol or LDL. So by checking apolipoprotein B, you actually get a measure of not just LDL, but across the spectrum of these lipid particles, which are the ones that are most likely to cause heart damage, which are the ones that are most likely to cause blood vessel damage, which are the ones that we really need to worry about. And as tests go, it should be relatively inexpensive for you. The second test I think that's very important is something called a C-Peptide. Now, what that is it is a link of proteins that basically gets cut off of insulin to make insulin active. I know that sounds crazy, but think of it like this, right? We've all had an electronic device where you have to pull that little plastic tab out. So think of C-Peptide like that pull tab that you have to pull out, because without pulling that tab out, the mouse isn't going to work. Without cutting off the C-Peptide, insulin isn't going to work. And the reason C-Peptide becomes important is because it gives us an idea of how much insulin your body is producing. So for instance, a lot of us probably have had something called a glycosylated hemoglobin, also known as HbA1c, checked. And that's a relatively good marker of where your average blood sugars have been over the last 90 days. That being said, though, if getting your blood sugar under control requires 10 times the amount of insulin that you would normally need, that's a problem, and that suggests insulin resistance. And that's where C-Peptide can be super helpful for us, because not only do you know what your average sugars are by checking a hemoglobin A1C, but we can also see how much insulin it takes to get there. And if you have a really high C-Peptide level, that can be a sign of early insulin resistance. Next is something that probably you've never heard of before, called Gamma-Glutamyl Transferase. Even for me, that's hard. So let's just call it GGT, right? What GGT is, it is a liver enzyme involved in detoxification. So it takes the bad things that we eat and the metabolites that our body creates and makes them less harmful helpful so that we can excrete them out of our bodies, either in our stool or in our urine or in our sweat. But one of the remarkable things about GGT, it is a very sensitive enzyme. So if you are exposed to a lot of chemicals, heavy metals, toxins, things like that, we will see an increase in GGT pretty quickly. Up until probably about 10 or 15 years ago, GGT was part of a normal, standard, complete metabolic panel, but for some reason it fell off. So this is now something you have to ask specifically for. And here in this diagram, we see this really interesting study that was done in 2005 that actually looked at levels of GGT as a function of cardiovascular health. And what you can see here is that solid line at top shows that the people with the lowest amount of GGT that was measurable actually did the best. And this kind of dotted line, this 5 dots, whatever you want to call that, shows the people that had the highest GGT. And these were the people that had toxin exposures, chemical exposures, oxidative stress, whatever it may have been, but their bodies were in trouble. And by checking GGT, we can get an early warning sign of what's going on in your body and perhaps go into further testing of your liver or giving you nutritional liver support. High numbers, as I said, might also, in addition to suggesting high toxic burden, may actually also suggest something called NAFLD, or non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is now the leading cause of liver failure in the United States. So this is something, again, not part of a traditional panel, but probably something that should be checked. Next, sex hormone binding globulin. My goodness, that is just a mouthful. But basically what this is a catcher's mitt, if you will, of the sex hormones, testosterone, dihydrotestosterone, and estradiol, in your blood. Things like diabetes type 2 and metabolic syndrome can actually increase your sex hormone binding globulin. And what that means is that you will have less of the circulating hormones that you need, less of the active hormones that you need to function. So symptoms of this may include brain fog, fatigue, decreased sex drive, or even infertility. So if you have any of these symptoms, you just feel not right? There might be something wrong with your sex hormone binding globulin. And finally, vitamin D. Vitamin D is as much a hormone as it is a vitamin, supports immune function, reduces inflammation, reduces oxidative stress, even involves blood clotting. And on the cardiac side, it's a little bit controversial because there are studies that show both the pro and con to vitamin D. But this is the perfect example of a normal level maybe not being an optimal level. So if you go to the lab, depending on the lab that you go to, generally they'll say a level of 20 to 30 or above is normal, right? However, for most humans, optimal is going to be somewhere between 50 and 80. So we want to make sure that we are getting the adequate amount of vitamin D, either through sunlight exposure or supplementation. But remember that this is definitely a vitamin that you can get toxicity from if you take too much. So you want to make sure that you're checking this at least 3 months, if not sooner, after you start supplementation to make sure that it's working. In addition to that, if you have a persistently low vitamin D, it might not be a vitamin D problem at all. It actually could be a sign of low magnesium. So if you see that you're constantly low in your vitamin D and you are still taking a vitamin D supplement, try adding a little bit of magnesium citrate or glycinate to your regimen to see if that helps. So I hope that was helpful. I will be happy to talk to you more in depth about any of these lab tests. So I hope you find that helpful. And please, I hope you found that helpful. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thanks, and stay educated.